Today's story is so mind-blowing and also extremely sad. To be honest, I don't really have an intro for today's story, and all I can do is let the story do the talking. But before we begin, if true crime stories intrigues your interest, then I highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do, and if you do subscribe, you can expect a brand new video once a week. But with all that being said, let's begin. Our story today starts off with a boy named James Holmes. James, who was born on December 13th, 1987, to a very well-off family, and he was the first child before a couple of more years later his sister would be born. James's parents, who again were very well off, his father, Robert Holmes, was a mathematician and also a scientist, with both of them degrees coming from Stanford University. And it was also safe to say that Robert was a very smart man. And of course, being smart would also come with many other perks, from different opportunities to make some good money, to the fact that people around him really respected him. His mother, Arlene Holmes, was just as smart as his father. She was a nurse, and while being a nurse, she would take pride on trying to be the best nurse possible. And again, just like James's father, she would be a very smart individual. And James knew while growing up that he had very smart parents, and James's parents hoped that both their kids would inherit their knowledge. Anyways, moving on to where James would be raised. James would spend most of his life at the Oak Hills community in Montreal, which, if you can't guess with the name, these people that lived in this area were very well off. And again, since James's parents had both good jobs, James would have a nice house. And a nice house would in turn make into a nice childhood, at least from a financial standpoint anyways. Growing up for James would be nice, since his house was located next to a beach. And while young, he would tend to go down there with his father, and they would just hang around in the sand, and they would talk to each other all the time. And thankfully, James would inherit both parents' academic skills, because from a very young age, James was known to be a very bright kid that would love to do every subject. And a lot of the times, James would be that kid that no matter what question you'd ask, he would have the answer to it. But during the school time, he would find his love for technology, and this would spark him to fall in love with technology and anything to do with technology. This would also help James make a lot of friends, as the other kids in his school would also love tech, but would not have the same knowledge as James, and they found themselves asking James loads of questions about technology. And since James was a nice kid, he would never deny a question and would always answer all of them. This would lead for James to make many friends. But even though during his times in elementary school he would make a lot of friends, he would specifically hang out with a smaller group of friends, which were his close friends, and these friends would stick with him throughout the school years. James and his close friends were always found making something or tinkering with something that had to do with tech, which unfortunately a lot of the times they got in trouble for that, but they didn't seem to care at all. But when James's teachers began to get more strict with James, and one of the main reasons was James would sometimes just run off into school and would hide in the school so he can play on some old cell phones. And one of the times he would hide in the computer room, and as he went inside the computer room he saw a computer, and of course he began to play on it. And when James's teacher found him, instead of being angry at James, they thought to themselves, at least he's in a room and we can keep an eye on him. So they let him play on the computer. So as James began to play on the computer more and more, he began to get more better at it, and he would eventually learn how to program. And by the time he was just 12 years old, he would make his class their own webpage. Even though James had many friends, he was still known as a shy kid, and also a shy kid that trusts a lot of people and trusts them a bit too fast. But even though he was shy, his personality would shine through. He was kind to everyone, especially his younger sister and his parents, and his friends and teachers would all recognize James as just a kind child. Since James's parents would pass on their smart genes to James, teachers would quickly begin to notice that James would be on a whole nother level compared to his classmates. But instead of being an arrogant person, he would actually be much more down to earth, and this would make all the teachers love teaching James. But things would unfortunately change for James as he went through his teenage years, and the main thing that would change about James was his mental health, which was rapidly declining. The downfall would start as he was beginning to hallucinate what he called nail ghosts, and from what he would tell his parents, he would hear while he's sleeping hammers hammering nails in the walls in the middle of the night. It would unfortunately not stop there though. He would continue to tell his parents that in his dreams he would see bombs exploding and buildings collapsing, and also things being burned down to the floor. Now James is still a child, and this would take a massive toll on him. because for any kid to start seeing these horrible images in his dream would take a massive toll on them and would also just drive them insane because they don't know what to do. And slowly but surely, James would start to isolate himself from his friends. And after cutting his friends off completely, he would start to do that with his family. And things would unfortunately get so bad that the 13-year-old James would try to unalive himself, as he just couldn't handle all these horrible dreams anymore. But as he tried, he would fail. Now you might be asking on what his parents would do. And well, James's parents weren't the talkative type. Even though, don't get me wrong, they raised him up to be an amazing child. But when it came to talking about their feelings or his feelings, they weren't really good at it. And since both parents were in the medical background, they would try to take a practical approach. But unfortunately, no matter what the parents did, nothing would really dig into James. Moving on to when James was about 14 years old, he and his family would move away and would move to San Diego. And instead of this being a refresh for James, it would actually make him much worse. And the main reason was, even though he rarely spoke to his friends, at least ever since he started hallucinating, they would reach out to him. And no matter if he reached out to them, they would reach out to him. And sometimes he would reach back out to them. But now, since he moved to San Diego, this was stripped away from James. And when James was younger, it was much easier for him to make friends. But now, since he was in the teenage years, it was much more awkward. And it was also just much more harder in general to make friends. So when the family arrived in San Diego, they would head into the neighborhood of Rancho Penquito, which, like the other neighborhood, was a very big neighborhood. But the big difference was the other boys in the neighborhood had been friends since little. And unfortunately, they weren't very friendly to outsiders. This would make making friends nearly impossible, and James would unfortunately come to the realization that he just can't make any friends here. And instead of getting rejected all the time by these other boys, he might as well just stay lonely, just like how he was back then. And so eventually he would join the local school, and at first he was actually pretty excited because he was determined to make some friends. But just like in the neighborhood, things wouldn't go well for James. He just couldn't make any friends around here. And again, just like when he lived back there in San Diego, he would find himself just being isolated. Things wouldn't be too bad though for James, as just like every other kid, James would play video games. And he would spend most of his time playing video games since he didn't have anything to do in the real world. But unlike the real world, the video game world, it was pretty easy to make friends. And this would provide James with an escape, and James would indulge all of it. He would have a specific preference on what video games he wanted to play, which were strategy-based games. And one of them games that he played all the time was called Warcraft 3. And once he picked up this game, he would get addicted to it very quickly. And he would find himself, when he finished school, he would just go upstairs and sit on his computer for multiple hours straight. And of course, like any other parent, James's parents would begin to get worried on James's behavior, as every day once he comes back home from school, they would watch him just go upstairs and never come back downstairs unless it was for food. And both parents kind of understood the situation and what James was going through, but they kind of thought that James wasn't trying hard enough to make friends. His father was a bit more relaxed on the whole gaming thing, so he wouldn't really do anything. But his mother was completely opposite, and she would just take things into her own hands. At first she would ask James, "Are you really trying hard to find these friends?" And of course James would say, "Yes, I've tried everything, but no one wants to be my friend." So in a last-ditch effort, she would tell James that, "I'll go to their parents to see if their kid wants to play with my kid." And so that's exactly what she would do. But when James's mother came back home, as James expected, she would tell him that no one wanted to play with him, which ultimately made James even more sad. As James is looking into his screen blankly, his mother would tell him that, "Why do they not want to play with you?" And James would stay silent before his mother would try to pry him for more information, which eventually would work, and would just tell her straight up that, "I'm awkward, I guess, and that's why no one wants to play with me." And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but James was right. The more he grew up, the more his awkwardness was becoming more apparent, and it got to the point where kids his age would feel very uncomfortable being around him. And again, to provide an escape from this horrible situation, James would just play video games all the time. Thanks to his effort and his dedication to this game, he would actually become one of the best players on this game. And since he had nothing to be proud of in his social life, this achievement that he made in his video game career made him proud at something. During his high school days, James would make an effort to play sports, because you see, James was about 6 foot tall. He wasn't the strongest, but that wouldn't really stop him from trying out for his school team. And while you could say it's a stroke of luck, and thanks to James's genetics, James would be playing football and would do cross country by the age of 16. And even though though again his sports life was taken off, his awkwardness would never go away, and in fact it would get worse. One of his country crossmate teammates would say, when it came to take photos for the school year, James wouldn't be able to stand close to his fellow teammates. But despite that, James would put his head down and would concentrate on his academic and sports career. And in 2006, he would finally graduate and would get his long sought after high school diploma. And now he was ready to take on that college life, and he would enroll in the University of California, Riverside. While he was there, he would actually get an opportunity to work as a counselor at a summer camp, which at first he didn't want to do, but after talking to himself and his parents, he decided that he was going to go through with it. But even though James thought to himself that he's doing a good job at this, his supervisors would tell each other that he was very hard to work with. In fact, one of his supervisors would describe him as stubborn and uncommunicative, and again, very awkward. Of course, the students that went to his university would all find him very strange, as he really never went out. And in the small chances that he did talk to someone, the way he would talk to someone would just be offensive, to put it more simply, just being blunt. Now moving on to autumn of 2010, James would land a job at a capsule coating factory. This factory was located in San Diego, and just like everyone else James had met in his life, they would find him strange as well. His colleagues would actually tell their boss that James was a bit weird, but his weirdness was getting worse and worse. And of course their boss would tell him how was he getting worse, and well, they would just tell him that we would catch him staring at the wall for minutes at a time. He would also barely respond to any of our questions. And when the boss first heard this, he was going to do something, but eventually he would ask his workers to be patient with him. But despite having this reputation as a weird kid in work, James would finally go on to graduate in the year 2010 with the Bachelor of Neuroscience. Once he graduated, he kinda wanted to relax for a bit at least, before he ultimately got back into his studies. But from a push from his parents, he would pursue a PhD in neuroscience at the University of Colorado, which the university was located in Ottawa. Now when arriving at this new school, James would find himself in Paris Street, where he had moved into a one-bedroom studio apartment. He would live in this apartment by himself and would quickly find out that living by yourself isn't fun whatsoever. And so to try to combat that, he would decide to sign up to several dating websites. And also, by the way, his social interactions were at an all-time low now. But he was desperate for some needed affection. But again, since his ability to talk to women or to talk to anyone was not good at all, he would hire women to pleasure his desires. The weird part was, once he was done with the women, he would go on the internet and then he would leave a review on how the experience went and how these women did, and he would leave these reviews on 4chan. But things would change for James. In October 2011, he would meet a girl in his biology class. At first, just like any other, she found him strange, but after talking to him for a while, she found him quite mysteriously intelligent, and this would be enough for them to go on their first date. The two would go to a local horror movie film festival, something that you should keep in mind since James was obsessed with movies, especially if they had an anti-hero, which was basically someone who was a flawed character. But either way, they would go on to finish the date, and to his surprise, it was a success, and the two would become into a couple. But as James and his now girlfriend would spend more time with each other, his awkwardness and strange behavior would begin to get more apparent. For example, he would say a controversial joke that left the people around him very awkward, along with her. And again, with him being so introverted, she would struggle to introduce him to both her family and friends. But despite these setbacks, the two would have a normal relationship, and unfortunately things wouldn't stay the same. At the end of 2011, both of them would break up, and as expected, this would take a massive toll on James. But he would sort out help at the student health clinic. From a young age, demons in my mind would never leave me alone, claimed James to his doctor. And whenever he would try to sleep, he would see shadows and flickering in the corner of his eye, and these shapes resembled fighting each other with firearms. And when he told this to his doctor, it would catch his doctor off guard, especially when he began to describe all the violent images in his dreams. And in a state of confusion, she would call a supervisor to sit in and listen to a conversation with James, and also to give her insight on what to do. But eventually, even though the doctors were doing everything that they could do, James would become less and less open with the doctors and would just eventually opt in to take medicine. Another disturbing thing that his doctors would discover during their brief time, they would find out that his fascination was mass killing, and one time he would actually admit to his own vague plan to execute on himself, which of course was extremely concerning. But due to medical reasons, once he stopped seeing her, she was not allowed to intervene with him. And not only his mental health was declining, but also his academic studies were also declining. So with depression, no job, and feeling just pure loneliness, James felt like there was nobody that he could turn to. And with each passing day sitting in his apartment by himself, with all of his dark thoughts lingering in his brain, something would happen that would change his life forever. It was late spring and James finally decided to go through a plan that at first he was scared to do, but in the back of his mind he'd always wanted to do. And now, since he had nothing left, he decided to go through with this plan. And so he would go to the shop and purchase the required items for this dream to become a reality. But before he lived this dream, he needed to do an exam. The next day would arrive, so June 7th, and James would go into his university to sit this test, and unfortunately he would fail this test. But even though old James would be very stressed on how he failed, the new James just didn't care at all. Once he exited the university, he would just go straight to his apartment. Now some time would pass, so now it's July 19th. No one's sure on why he waited this long, but he would send his doctor a special package. Now the final date, July 20th, in Aurora, Colorado, there was a premiere weekend to a highly anticipated movie, The Dark Knight Rise. The dyed-haired James blended into the crowd as he entered the movie theater, and it could be seen him purchasing his tickets to the midnight viewing. And of course no one would notice him, and again bear in mind the theater was full, with about 390 people crammed into one room, excited to catch the first viewing of this movie. James would walk in and would sit in the front row and watch all the previews before the movie began. Strangely, he would get up from his seat during the 20-minute mark and would exit the theater via emergency exit, which the exit was next to the screen. And again, no one really paid attention to him as their eyes were glued to the screen. And once he walked out of the building, he would go to his car, which was next to the exit. But just before he fully committed to going outside, he would get a plastic box and put it in front of the exit door so it doesn't close. Once he got to his car, he would open the trunk and he would change his clothes, wear a gas mask, and picked out his special item. But before he turned around, he put his headphones on and then turned those headphones up to full max. Once he'd done that, he turned around and in his hands were tear gas grenades, and so he would unpin the tear gas and throw it into the theater. And once the frenzy started, James would pull out his shotgun and would unload all of his shells, pointing at the back row of the theater. And I can only imagine on what these people were going through. Not only could they not see, they could also hear gunshots and people screaming. Once his shotgun finally ran out of ammo, he would get out his second item, his rifle, and unfortunately he would unleash a barrage of bullets, and this time it was going to every aisle. And at this point again, everyone was screaming for their lives, and many people were trying to escape, but a lot of people were getting stuck due to the corpses of other people were getting in the way, and this was especially difficult for the people in the middle of the theater. The police were called and the operator on the phone had no idea what the person was saying, but once they heard the gunshots in the background, everything was clear to them. Since there were so many panicked civilians, the car park would get congested, which meant the ambulances that were trying to enter the car park would struggle to get a parking space near the building. The worst part was when James realized the rampage was over. He took advantage of the confusion and would go back to his car, which again was nearby. No one knew that he was in that car. Everyone thought that he was a member of the law enforcement. And of course it didn't help that he had all this tactical equipment on. But he wouldn't get far and he would get arrested at 12:45. And unfortunately his horrific antics wouldn't end there, because once caught he would look into one of the officers dead in the eye and would tell them that he had left many booby traps in his apartment. And these traps weren't small at all, because the police would find out that there was over 30 hand grenades inside of his apartment and over 100 liters of gasoline spread across it. So when I told you that James was going to carry out his dream, well, his dream was to go on a mad killing spree, and so he would go to the shop and buy a shotgun and an assault rifle along with a handgun as options to kill people with. Why he chose a theater was again simply due to the fact that there was going to be a lot of people close by, which made his dream much easier to attain. And what he sent to his doctor was actually a diary, and in his diary the doctor saw that the painstakingly dark thoughts that was taking over James, and also the plan that he was going to do in the theater. But before she could tell anyone, it was too late. James would murder 12 people and injure 72 others, and on July 23rd James would be sentenced to 24 counts of first-degree murder and 116 counts of attempted first-degree murders, and there was no bail due to his destructive behavior. He was originally going to be sentenced to death, but due to his mental health, he would just get a life sentence without a possibility of parole. So that'll be it for today's video of true crime stories. Intrigues your interest, and I highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do. And if you do subscribe, you can expect a brand new video every week. With all that being said, thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.